May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to enjoy a 3-month sabbatical from my church in New Jersey. It was a marvelous time of renewal and adventure and rest, but there was one thing about my sabbatical that especially surprised me. You see, one of the things I looked forward to most during this 14-week absence from the parish and my duties as rector was being able to worship with different communities, different congregations. I had been leading worship, including that weekly pressure of preaching, for nearly 10 years. And of course, it had been nearly 10 years since I had sat in the pews with my family. So before I left, I made a list of all the churches I wanted to visit, all the preachers I wanted to hear, places I wanted to glean things from. This was my golden opportunity, and I wanted to make sure no worshiping opportunity was missed. But even with all of that, best of intentions and design for my time away from the parish, guess how many times I went to church during those 14 weeks? 3. Just 3 times. Because each time I went somewhere else to worship, something was missing. And at first I couldn't put my finger on it, but then I realized it was wrapped up in the fact that I was a visitor, a stranger, and I didn't feel like a part of the community. I was just somebody taking up space in the back pew where no one knew my name, nobody knew my needs, and nobody certainly knew my gifts. And I found that anything but worshipful. Now, don't get me wrong, this was not a case of that I was not welcomed warmly by the congregations that I visited. I was. But each of these Sundays, I left longing for something. And this morning's gospel helped me gain some clarity about what I was missing in those interactions. You see, this morning, Luke writes about a woman very much in need of healing, bent over for nearly 2 decades. And he doesn't name the woman, which is not particularly unusual. But what is unusual is that Luke pretty much races past her and her healing, giving it only minimal airtime, 4 sentences to be exact. But then he quickly moves on to Jesus' encounter with the leader of the synagogue. And this caught my attention, and it should catch your attention too. Because for a healing like that, which took place right there in the synagogue, in the middle of Jesus' sermon, or his teaching, as it were, with a crowd of witnesses all around them, and again, for a woman who had not stood up straight for nearly 2 decades, this should have been written in neon and lights in the building, on the Main Street banner, or on the local news blotter. But instead, Luke races right past it, giving more words to the interaction between Jesus and the synagogue leaders instead. Now, as an aside, and this is not my main point, but it does make me wonder that maybe the reason Luke didn't emphasize this woman's healing, particularly with a headline status, was that because the woman's healing, maybe it was an all too common occurrence in the synagogue. Maybe it was common knowledge that on Sundays or whenever you were worshiping in the synagogue, healings would take place. Maybe that week it was the woman who had been bent over for 18 years. Maybe the week prior it was a man on a mat. And maybe the week before that it was a man who was blind. Ho hum. Maybe it was just a common occurrence in worship in the synagogue. It is interesting to imagine that thread. But the point is that Jesus healed this woman on the Sabbath, and he did it right in the middle of his preaching, right in the middle of his teaching, and right in the middle of the gathered community. And that, I realized, was what I was missing during my sabbatical. Community. authentic community where weaknesses are known and shared, where the bent over, where the vulnerable, where the sick, where the estranged, where the desperately anxious, where the spiritually vulnerable and physically disabled, where the emotionally wrecked all gather together, worshiping God and serving others. And that is the antidote to our loneliness and our isolation. We're being together. We come together to know the comforting and the healing power of God. Now, I'm sure that I have said this before from the pulpit, or at a minimum. I know that I mentioned it back in Lent when we did our adult education focus on the cross, but it bears repeating that our relationship with God, you should know, is not just a vertical relationship, God and me, or God and you. If it was, I would have been perfectly fulfilled and restored by my worship with other congregations on my sabbatical. It wouldn't have mattered. But our relationship with God is also horizontal, like the cross. There's a cross beam there. And it's about you and me and every other person in this community. And again, it's so much more than just being nice or welcoming to people when they enter our doors. It's about knowing and being known. It's about being in relationship with one another. This week I have been reading a book called Where God Happens, written by former Archbishop of Canterbury and scholar and mystic Rowan Williams. And in this book, he reflects on the wisdom of the 4th and 5th century so-called desert fathers and mothers, who presumably went out, removed themselves from the community, and went out into the desert alone. But what happened is they removed themselves, and the community followed them. And Rowan Williams then applies their communal spiritual teaching that they encountered to the spiritual lives of us in the 21st century. And one of the initial points that he makes, he quotes one monk's metaphorical teaching, and he says, you don't build a house by starting with the roof and working down. You start with the foundation. And the foundation is our neighbor. The neighbor is where we start. Every commandment of Christ depends on this. Depends on our neighbor. And as such, then, the bent-over woman was healed and set free from her bondage, but not so that she could just walk out the doors of the synagogue and go out on her own and blaze her own trail. But she was set free to continue to be a part of that community, to bear witness to Jesus' healing power, and to be a blessing to all those who gathered day in and day out and in the days to come. So community, in fact, is how our relationship with God grows. It's how we practice giving and receiving love. It's how we practice giving and receiving forgiveness. It's how we practice and experience reconciliation. And it's how we practice and we experience hope. We can't do any of that on our own, only together. And of course, when I say all of this, I am in no way minimizing, little disclaimer here, how difficult it is to be in community. Okay? In fact, when we were vacationing this summer outside of Charleston, South Carolina, I noticed that there was a banner hanging outside what used to be an Episcopal church. They have since left the Episcopal church. But the banner said, quote, "It's easy, just show up." Well, I took issue with that. I do. It's not easy. It's not about just showing up. Because we are all flawed in some ways. We are both sinner and saint, all of us. And only together can we screw up, and then only together can we make amends. It's only together that we can make room in our hearts to love that person who drives us literally insane. Okay? As theologian Henry Nouwen is famous for saying, quote, "Community is the place where the person you least want to live with always lives." Right? Only together can we get out of our complacency and grow our compassion for those in need. Only together can we witness the day-to-day experiences of the resurrection. It's not easy. And believe me, it takes so much more than just showing up. It's hard work, but it is blessed work. And community is how we survive and also how we grow and thrive as Christians. And so here I want to put a plug in for the very many ministries and opportunities to engage deeper into community in the year ahead, which are all conveniently laid out for you in Hensley Hall. So if you haven't already seen the ministries and gone over there and to take a look, do that after worship. Walk around the room. Talk to the people who are already engaged in those ministries. Because the foundation of our spiritual life starts from the ground up. And there are so many opportunities for this community to grow. And as we do, just imagine the infinite possibilities for us to reveal the beautiful, powerful heart of God to one another and to the world. And then, might I add, like the formerly bent over woman, we'll be praising God as we do. Amen.